Welcome back to Stop the Takes. I'm Dakota, that is Austin, and we are reacting to the news that Aaron Rodgers plans to sign with the Pittsburgh Steelers, something we all thought was going to happen at some point. Some people may have already thought it happened based on their comments on live television. And now he has officially announced that he is going to sign with the Steelers. What are your immediate thoughts, Austin?
Well, immediate thoughts are I had to edit the title right before we got on here because I thought he had already signed. Apparently, he's just agreed to sign, whatever that means. I guess the contract details aren't hashed out yet, but he plans to sign with the Steelers. We all kind of expected this, right, dude? That's why we have in the title. It's finally because this was the expectation for a long time. Like we were thinking, like, okay, if it's not Aaron Rodgers, like it was a perfect fit because it's like there's no other available QBs really for the Steelers, and there's no other landing spots for Aaron Rodgers. So it's literally like, okay, it has to be Aaron Rodgers to the Steelers. And it finally happened, dude. I'll be honest, like I mean, I don't think Steelers fans' expectations are too high. I have a Steelers buddy already talked to him already about this, but I don't think this makes them like contending for Super Bowl. I think this probably is a move that's going to continue Mike Tomlin's like winning streak going, his seasonal winning streak. And that's about it, man. I think Rodgers is past his prime and that's, that's is what it is, but he is, was their best option this offseason.
And the data backs that up. Like for a while, Rodgers from a PFF, we reference PFF a lot, but he was one of their highest graded quarterbacks consistently, especially through his peak, right? When he was winning all those MVPs in 2020. It's kind of when things changed. But yeah, his PFF passing grade this past season was a 77.8. And I think the concerning part with that is that it's basically the same as it was in 22. So his last season in Green Bay wasn't great. That's when like people already started to kind of note a decline. Was it the situation there? There's a lot of things to try to blame. But his grade coming out to basically the same thing between those two seasons is a little concerning. I just don't think, Tom Brady's recent, 40 plus, mini career he had after hitting 40, I think has skewed perspective on quarterbacks a bit. And now we have this recency bias of, oh, well, just because the dude's 40 doesn't mean he can't still be an elite quarterback. That doesn't happen.
Yeah,
Tom
no.
Brady is a complete anomaly for a ton of reasons. And so it is an interesting situation to be in where you're banking on essentially a 40-year-old to come in and kind of be the savior. Um, and, to your point, I found an article, though, from Steelers Depot where they're basically saying, and whether this is the actual expectation of fans or more so this situation, but they're basically saying if you don't win a playoff game from this was a complete failure and waste of time.
There's a real argument for that, dude. I mean, again, I referenced my buddy who's a Steelers fan. He wanted to go with Mason Rudolph, not to win, but to lose. They've been in QB purgatory since Big Ben has retired. They've had five
Yeah.
different starting quarterbacks since Big Ben has been there. So I can see it from that perspective. I can see it from a Steelers fan's perspective saying, hey, if this isn't going to be a needle mover, which I think kind of the general consensus is it's not, right? Especially in the AFC, then why do it? Why do it? You're just doing it to like keep this kind of arbitrary like 9 to 8 winning streak. Like, like I get it. It's meaningful for Mike Tomlin. He's won with some kind of questionable teams, especially questionable QB play, and that's impressive. But if the Steelers want to go somewhere in the playoffs, they need to reset. There needs to be some sort of reset. And it kind of seemed like they were going that direction with the George Pickens thing, and they're kind of trying to load up on draft capital, but they also traded for DK Metcalf. So it's kind of a weird balance they're playing. But to me, if you want to try to compete for a Super Bowl, the only way to do that really in the Steelers position is to try to go for a young quarterback and try to hit on that. And you're not going to be able to do that when you're drafting in the late teens to early 20s every year in the draft.
Yeah, and with the last wave of quarterbacks that retired, like Big Ben, a team that's been in a similar position as them has been the Saints, right? Where Drew Brees retires, and you do get stuck in this kind of QB purgatory because your team's never really that bad. You've usually had a coach good enough to prevent you from being that bad. Um, and you just get stuck unless you do things that you get lucky like the Chargers did, where they ended up having a high enough draft pick to get their replacement after Phillip Rivers, or you do what the Packers just did with Jordan Love, where you draft a guy when you still have your quarterback. So a lot of things could have prevented this, but it has been a rough journey. And because they always win 8 or 9 games, they are always picking between 18 and 22, and you're just not going to find a franchise quarterback there. And this offense is going to be really interesting to watch because they got rid of George Pickens, DK in his first season there. He's going to be wide receiver one, and then it's not great after that. Wide receiver two right now is Bobby Trees. So Robert Woods, which you don't really in the year 2025, you don't really want Robert Woods to be your wide receiver two.
You do not.
No,
I mean,
skill wise,
I don't know how many points in his career you wanted that to begin with, but especially in 2025.
Yeah. So they have other weapons. They just drafted Caleb Johnson, and then they've got Freiermuth still. But it still also just feels like a similar situation Rodgers has been in the past too, where you just don't really have a ton of weapons, and the offensive line is not great. We just dealt with that with the Jets as well. Their offensive line wasn't great. I would say it's probably now a step behind them after the draft. The Jets at least got Armand Minbu to come in there. Yeah, so this is a middle to below half offensive line as well.
Like, how confident are you that the Steelers' let me emphasize that, offensive roster is better than the Jets was last year? I mean, especially after the Devontae Adams trade midway through the year. Like, I'm taking the Jets team more than likely. You have more weapons, and the offensive line is comparable. Listen, I will say the offensive line can be, like, they have potential to improve greatly. Yeah. Like, they're still relying on their young tackles. And if those young tackles develop, then okay, this offensive line is going to be fine. But that's still an if. Like, we haven't seen it yet. Since we haven't seen it yet, we can't say, okay, it's definitely going to happen. So that would definitely concern me if I'm a Steelers fan. And you also, listen, Aaron Rodgers he's still a viable starting quarterback. Like, last year, he was still a viable starting quarterback in the NFL, but you're not getting, prime Aaron Rodgers here. Like, that's just the reality. His play has come down. Like you mentioned earlier, the data suggests that he is just not the same player that he once was. So I don't expect him to just elevate this team either. Like, I don't expect that. Yeah. I just don't. So, and you have to also add, Dakota, they're in one of the hardest divisions in football.
Yep.
I mean, right? Like, you have the Browns who, yes, are in rebuild mode, but they're still, I mean, that's always going to be a tough game. And then the Ravens and the Bengals. And, I think Steelers fans know that it's really tough competition. I mean, they found that out in the playoffs last year against the Ravens. So it's one of those things. It's already a hard division to win. And I don't see Aaron Rodgers, like, again, I don't see him moving the needle. I really don't. But the Steelers are also, which I kind of respect this, and Mike Tomlin and the Steelers are not a team that are looking to lose. Like, they want to compete every year. And unfortunately, I really do believe Aaron Rodgers was probably their best option, right? Like, let's be honest. Their other options were what? Re-sign Justin Fields. That was probably their second or maybe their best option, was re-signing Justin Fields after the small sample size you saw last year from Fields. And he's gotten better. They didn't really have any draft options. They didn't have any other free agent options. Like, you just mentioned the Saints earlier, talking about their QB purgatory. Listen, they're in a similar situation, right? They're still looking for their quarterback, and what do they have to do? I mean, they're Tyler Shuck is slated to be the starter, man. I mean, that's not a winning formula, and the Steelers are not into losing. So I think for a Steelers fan, this might sound a little bleak, but I would hope this Aaron Rodgers thing doesn't work out, just so that they can potentially be in a position next year, around this time during the draft, to get a true franchise quarterback that for the future, right? Because Aaron Rodgers is good for next season, but he's definitely not the future here.
Yeah, and it's going to be really interesting to see. He's not going to bring the high end play that he used to. Looking at his big time throw percentage was something that he's always been a PFF stat of basically how often you're making tight window throws. or in clutch moments. And historically, he's been one of the best at that. But the past season, he had the lowest of kind of his career, to be honest. And the other side of that though is he may not have as many high elevating plays like Justin Fields can have with his legs. But one thing Aaron Rodgers has always done well is take care of the ball. He always has a low turnover worthy play rate and just doesn't throw a lot of interceptions and things like that. So we'll be curious to see with how good the Steelers defense is. Is he just in a position to game manage their way into the playoffs and that be enough? But to your point, in the division they're in, they're going to have to squeak into the playoffs because those two games are going to be tough. And, you know, it's funny how similar the situation is to the Jets where he's just at, because we talked about it, where a lot is banking on two young tackles, and the Steelers in the exact same situation now. They're just slightly more, they don't have a rookie. They have a guy from 23 and a guy from 24. But the guy from 23 hasn't looked great, and now he's slotted to be your starting left tackle since they lost Dan Moore. So I honestly don't know what to expect with him being in Pittsburgh. I think they will continue Tomlin's streak. I think they're good enough to do that. But to what you touched on, I just don't know if it's going to elevate them past anything. I think it may be slightly, but then the other aspect of all of this is just like the kind of locker room aspect too, where like the dude goes on social media and just starts saying stuff, and who knows if he's going to mesh with the people there. Seemed like that could have been part of the problem with the Jets. But what's fascinating too is just looking at this Steelers roster after having Russell Wilson and Justin Fields on those 1-year deals. They now have 4 quarterbacks in their room that were not on the team last year. They have completely switched, and who knows what that will result in. But to your point, I think they're also not setting themselves up to be in position to take one. And then the DK Metcalf trade also took away a second-round pick this year where they could have drafted a guy that could have been developing now. They've got Will Howard in there, but you don't draft a guy in the 6th to be your franchise guy. So
I was a little surprised they didn't take a QB higher. We talked about that there in draft season. But to your point, they didn't have their second rounder. The locker room stuff is interesting. I would say it's more so like a coachability aspect of Rodgers that has been missing, right? I mean, he had his buddy Nathaniel Hackett the last few years, which is like, it was basically Aaron Rodgers' offense with the Jets. It looked like his old Green Bay Packers offense with the Jets. So, and you have Arthur Smith with the Steelers. It's like, how is that going to work? Arthur Smith has been a pretty successful offensive coordinator, all things considered. I know, like, he was clowned as the Falcons head coach, but he was really good with the Titans. And I think he also elevated the Steelers at points last year, to be completely honest with you, man. I don't think that team on offense was very talented last year, and I think he helped elevate them at points. So it will be interesting to see if Aaron Rodgers plays within that system, because I think if he does play within that system, kind of like you said, I think they will absolutely he'll be able to game manage them into the playoffs in a sense, because he's still, like I say, he's still an average viable starter in the league. And when he's been coached, right, when he let Matt LaFleur coach him with the Packers, his game elevated, man. His game elevated in a massive, massive way. So that's going to be an interesting aspect of this, is like if Aaron Rodgers, the 40-plus-year-old Aaron Rodgers is willing to be coached once again. And, that's an interesting part of this. I think he probably will. If I had to predict, I think he probably will, just because, listen, this is Mike Tomlin's team, right? Like Mike Tomlin's not putting up with that. Like we just saw him trade away George Pickens, and a lot of that I think was non-football related. So like he doesn't put up with that kind of stuff, and he manages it really well. So I think from that perspective, it'll be fine. But again, I don't think the high end talent's there anymore. So I don't think you're going to see them overthrow the Ravens. Like it's just not. I don't think that's a realistic expectation for the Steelers, and it's unfortunate because I think Steelers fans are probably mixed on Tomlin, right? Like some of them feel like, okay, it's time to move on, and some of them kind of give him respect for winning with less in some years. It's just an unfortunate situation for him because he wants to win every year, which totally makes sense. Like just from a coaching perspective, he wants to win. He wants to protect his job, blah, blah, blah. But that's kind of their problem, right, Dakota? Like their winning has kind of kept them from rebuilding in a way. It's a weird purgatory that the Steelers are in. And you compared it to the Saints, I'd agree with that. I'd say it's a little bit like the Colts since Andrew Luck until they were able to draft
True,
AR in the
true.
top 5, and that hasn't worked
Yep.
out. So it's like it's tough, man. It's a tough situation to be in. It's unfortunate, but we'll see, man. Like you said, it's hard to predict how this all pans out because I think there's a lot of question marks with the Steelers, right? You just mentioned how will it all mesh together. Not only are the QBs all different, the receiving core is completely different. Like the offensive line has been reshuffled. Like there's a lack of continuity there, man. So it's going to be interesting to see how it all ends up meshing together.
Absolutely. And I, I think from just a fan's perspective, I'm excited about the drama and I'm excited about the AFC North being tough because the Bengals and Ravens are so good and having the Steelers continue to be competitive like this. And I think he'll add that at least at that bare minimum. Um, will be fun to watch from a neutral fan perspective. But in terms of what their actual ceiling is and everything, I just don't think it's as high. I mean, had you signed Aaron Rodgers 4 years ago, you'd probably be really excited right now. But it's just, yeah, he's over 41 years old. It's just, yeah, the
It's
ceiling is
tough.
not that high.
It's
It
not.
is, and it sucks, and it's interesting because clearly he just wants to keep playing. But it's funny because to your point, like when he did, brought Nathaniel Hackett in and everything, and it's like how much are you wanting to try to actually go win something or just continue to do this? Because that's the thing I think Tomlin can do for him is say, you listen to me now, like if we do it my way, we may have a chance to accomplish something here together because you're clearly still playing for a reason. So let's go
Yeah.
try. This is probably his last shot. Like, let's be
Oh,
honest. If he is playing in 2026, I think
yes.
everybody would be shocked. So, like, you need to fully believe in what Mike Tomlin is doing and trust him and let it play out. Because if you try to do it your way again, I think we're just going to have another fiasco like we just had with the Jets. So,
Yeah, man, and I think the spot that we mentioned the division and everything. I think that's one reason Rodgers was hesitant to sign with the Steelers, man. Like all of
true.
this combined, the tough AFC North in particular, the Mike Tomlin, like all of these factors combined, I think that's why Rodgers was hesitant. I think he would have much rather went to Minnesota. I really think he would have much rather went to Minnesota.
Yeah.
A lot better situation. Even the coaching situation from an offensive perspective with Kevin O'Connell looks a lot better. So it's just, to me, that was a better situation for him, but Minnesota wanted to go with JJ. So it was like kind of a no. It was pretty much a no for everyone in the NFL
Hmm.
except for the Steelers. So that's where he ends up. And like you said, man, this is probably his last shot. It's kind of unfortunate his career's ending up this way just because he is a legend, right? Like when it's all said and done, Aaron Rodgers is still going to be in that top 10 all-time QB conversation. That's how good the peak was, and people will question the playoff success. I think a lot of that's overblown, frankly. Um, if I'm being honest. So it is unfortunate. It's all like unraveling like this because, Peyton ended with the Super Bowl. Tom Brady ended on a
Hmm.
pretty high note. Like Brady was still in it. I mean, really playing well by the time he retired. Like all these quarterbacks of recent, like Breeze retired with the Saints, even though Roethlisberger retired with the Steelers. Like all these like stories kind of ended well for these guys. It looks like Rodgers is going to be the one where it just doesn't end well. I mean, and we've seen this before, right? Like even though Brett Favre had a great ending with Minnesota, made him to the NFC Championship game, the year after he was abysmal, right? He was awful. And, it just happens, dude. That
Yeah.
sometimes that's how it ends. Like dudes get old. And like to your point earlier, dude, like Brady has kind of really screwed with people's minds, man, about how long guys go. And Brady was just different, right? He took care of his body on a different level. And that's why he was able to play as long as he did. That's just not the norm, man. Like QBs do not play into their 40s. It just doesn't happen unless you're Tom Brady. So it's kind of sad to see just like his career go the way it's going, and some fans, like especially younger fans, this will be how they remember Aaron Rodgers. They won't remember,
Yep.
the great Aaron Rodgers, the MVPs, all that. So
Yeah, and yeah, 4 MVPs. Only Peyton has more. I do feel like Rodgers is one of those kind of polarizing players where, like, I feel like you see people either say he's a minimum of top 2, top 3 quarterback of all time, or they just completely underrate him. And to your point, like, I think this will impact that from a younger generation who didn't get to see him. And it does seem like a lot of younger fans now watch the NFL, and that's skewed the Tom Brady stuff to now this, and then what Rodgers' career was. So it is unfortunate to see it end. And who knows? Maybe we'll be eating crow anyway. And in 6 months, we're sitting here saying, "Wow, the Steelers are looking great and they're going to make a playoff run." But we'll just have to wait and see. But it finally happens. Let's hold out. He says it's going to happen.
Yeah, let's not pull a Joy Taylor on the show
Yeah,
and
exactly.
and ask
Why is
ask
he
him
not
to
in
go to
camp? Why is he not at OTAs yet?
Is he going to show up to OTAs now that he's actually a Steeler? I guess we'll see.
We'll find out.
We'll find out.
But he announces it's going to happen. So the wait is finally over. We've all suffered together of what we knew would happen, but Rodgers will be a Steeler, and we'll see how it plays out. Yeah, appreciate everybody for tuning in. And yeah, until next time.
Thanks for talking ball with us.